I'm very glad to be here. I was adopted nearly from birth, and like many adoptees, for years I dreamed of being able to meet my birth mother. My search began on my 18th birthday, and I was shocked to have been told that that door was closed, that I would never have the opportunity to meet her, and it was very difficult for me. I went ahead and I petitioned for what's called my non-identifying information. And when it arrived, it had everything you could imagine about my birth mother except for her name. Her eye color, hair color, height, weight, age, the age of my half-brother and half-sister who were 11 and 13 when I was born, her ethnicity, religious background, occupation, educational level, detailed medical history. And I just hung on to every word. But then for my father, it said that he was Caucasian and of large build. And that was it. And I thought, that sounds like a police description. I mean, come on, she couldn't even say his eye color, hair color, nothing. I thought it over. I mean, what could the possible explanation be? And I called up my caseworker and asked her, was my mom raped? And she said, yeah. I didn't want to tell you, and I was just devastated. I remember feeling so ugly and unwanted, thinking who would ever love me, who's ever going to want to marry me, because the explanation for my adoptive brother, who had been in and out of jail and prison since the age of 16, was that socially deviant behavior is genetic. Well, what does that mean about who I am? Do I have this ugliness lurking inside of me? I instantly thought about the issue of abortion, because that's what you always hear about, right? Growing up, abortion wasn't talked about a whole lot in my family. When I was 12, my 16-year-old cousin had one, and I recall the discussions being that this was not a good thing. In high school, I remember studying this issue and seeing photos of aborted babies and being horrified, but I didn't identify with that. I didn't think, oh, that could have been me. No, I thought it was just some sad story where she couldn't afford to keep me, but abortion doesn't apply to my life, I thought. But I turn 18, I get this information, and it has to do with my very survival. And it was as if I could hear the echoes of all those people who would say, I'm pro-choice. Well, or I'm pro-choice especially in cases of rape. Or I'm pro-life. Well, except in cases of rape. And I realized that all those people were talking about me, about my life, and I felt like I had at least half the world against me. I later learned from a Gallup poll that of self-professing pro-lifers, 60% make the rape exception. So I had more than half the pro-lifers against me. And I felt like I was now going to have to justify my own existence, that I would have to prove myself to the world that I shouldn't have been aborted and that I was worthy of living. One of the first things I did when I learned how I was conceived was to look in a phone book and look up Right to Life. And I called a Right to Life office. I had heard that phrase sometime in my life, and I just wanted to speak to someone on the phone who valued my life. And they did. They spoke words into my life at a time when I was really hurting. And then I asked my parents how they felt about abortion, my adoptive parents, and asked them, what about cases of rape? And my dad started to say, well, I've always felt like, who am I to say what a woman can or cannot do with her own body? I mean, I guess I've always been pro-choice. And I said to him, but Dad, you mean to tell me that my whole entire existence wasn't worth it? In like 18 years you've watched me grow up, that you really believe that her body, her choice is more important than my whole life? Really? You really believe that, Dad? And it was like he instantly snapped out of it. No, I don't believe that. And he started to say, wow, how would I ever get to a point where I would believe such a thing? And he started to talk about how, as a professor, on a liberal campus that it was just expected that if you were progressive-minded, that you would be pro-choice. But he had never stopped to consider the ramifications of that position, especially as an adoptive father. And so I learned at a minimum at 18 that my story had the potential to change hearts and minds, but I still struggled. And ultimately, what I wanted to know is how my birth mother felt. I wanted to hear that maybe there was some mistake, that this was not how I was conceived. And so I ended up being one of the first people in Michigan to have a judge allow my caseworker to try to contact my birth mother and see if she wanted to meet me. And it worked. I was attending college out of state at the time. I finally received a letter with my birth name, which was Judy Ann Miracle. So I was a miracle baby. I thought that was pretty cool. And it had her name, Joanne, with her phone number. Trembling, I called her up. And she said that she was sorry to hear that I already knew. But then she proceeded to fill me in on some horrific details that I was totally unequipped to hear. She's 4'10". She weighed 90 pounds, really petite. A single mom heading to the grocery store at night right down the street from her home. The guy jumped out of the bushes with a knife. Abducted her, dragged to her field, and basically she went on to describe for me in graphic detail how he brutally raped her. And that's how I was conceived. That was so hard to hear for several reasons. First of all, to think that I was conceived out of a truly worst case scenario, I just felt totally worthless. Like garbage. Because of people who would say that my life was like garbage, that I was disposable. And then I had to realize that my biological father was a really bad man. She said she had gone to several police lineups and stopped going because she wouldn't recognize his face, but that they knew that this was a serial rapist. And then all these years I had really dreamed so much of meeting her. I had written poetry about meeting her. And so to hear that she had been violated like this really pained me. We arranged for me to fly home and meet her on her 51st birth date. And in the meantime, she sent me photos and a letter. She wrote, "My dearest Rebecca, hoping by now that the shock of finding out all the details of your birth are forgotten. For that was not reason enough of having to give up something as beautiful as you were. Nothing as precious as a baby. Mostly when you go through the 9 months and the birth all alone, feeling like no one knows you. But you were so perfect and pretty. All these years I had nothing of you, nothing saying you were part of me, just the memory of carrying a baby that I hoped one day would try to find her real mother, as I always wanted to know my baby. You were always with me in my thoughts, you were always with me in my heart, mostly in July. It seems like a lifetime, I know. When I was sick 2 years ago, I thought I would never get to know my little girl. Would you please see if you can get me a copy of the letter you sent to the Oakland County judge? It made me cry. Also, I would like copies of your poems. These are things I would like to read. It's been a long 3 weeks looking forward to our meeting. I didn't know how to express my inner feelings." And she put in caps, "It's so great, big, beautiful. It's always been my dream. I am so happy I'm crying." And she wrote in closing, "A love that aided me for 19 years. My daughter at last. With love, your mom, Joanne." Wow, that was just all my dreams come true. I felt so affirmed, and I felt like, yes, I was wanted. I flew home, had a wonderful reunion weekend with her. The next day she had a huge family reunion for me. I got to meet my half-brother, which was really weird to think we could have grown up together. Today we're very close. My half-sister I met 6 years later when I flew down to Florida for a 5-generation photo. It was the 4th time in a row that they had 5 generations of women alive. I got to room with my grandmother at the time, which was so cool. But after this initial reunion weekend, I flew back to college, went to a few meetings of Students for Life. I didn't get involved at that point because I didn't feel like I fit in anywhere. I was making horrible choices in my life. But it gave me the courage and support I felt I needed to finally call her and ask her about abortion. Because I still needed to know. And she told me that if abortion had been legal in Michigan, that she would have aborted me. And I said, you don't mean if you had to do it all over again, right? And her reply was, no. I asked, well, what about everything you said in that letter? Not reason enough? What about when you told me that you were sick 2 years ago? The only thing that kept you going was the hope that someday you'd be able to meet me. What about that? You wouldn't have had that. And her response was just, you don't know what it was like. And I know that that's true. But I also know that today she's okay. In fact, she's doing great. She has a wonderful husband, a beautiful home, and despite the utter horror of her saying that to me, again, her body, her choice was more important than my whole entire existence. I still chose to nurture a relationship with her, to honor her for the role that she did play in my life. And frankly, I just thought that if I was good enough, that she'd change her mind. Well, by the time she did change her mind about abortion, I was at a really good place in my life, now knowing my value, identity, and purpose in Christ, where I no longer needed to hear that for my own well-being. But it was still great to hear. I was with her when she was making baby clothes for my niece in Florida, who was in an unplanned pregnancy with her first great-grandchild. She said to me, I'm really glad that she's having this baby, and I've changed my mind about all that. 2 days later, Norma McCorvey, Jane Roe from Roe v. Wade, announced the very same thing to the nation, that she had changed her mind about abortion after years of having worked in an abortion clinic, yet never actually having had one herself. You see, by the time her case reached the United States Supreme Court, she had given birth. And how nice that she can do that, change her mind about abortion, still have the opportunity to enjoy a relationship with her child from that case. What about the millions of women since, for whom changing their mind is the very painful realization that they will never have that opportunity here on earth? Now, how many of you know whether or not she had a son or a daughter? Do any of you know? You guys are pro-life activists.
Yeah, 3 kids. 3 daughters.
And the first one from the case in Roe v. Wade, the first pregnancy, yeah, she had a daughter. There is a real woman walking the face of this earth who was targeted for abortion in that case. Don't ever let people forget that we are talking about real people, but especially in the case of Roe v. Wade. And whenever we place a gender on that child, that further serves to humanize that child. And so one of my pet peeves in the pro-life movement is when you hear the slogan, it's a child, not a choice. No, he or she is a child, not a choice, not an it. That's a dehumanizing term. I represented the mother in Michigan's frozen embryo case, and the doctors testified that from conception, each one of these embryos in that case that were one cell, each one of them were literally male or female and ascertainably so. And to help you remember to say he or she, or sons or daughters, brothers and sisters, just remember what it says in Genesis, that God created them, male and female. He created them. It says, in the beginning, God created them, male and female. He created them. And right from our beginnings, he creates us male or female. And so please, don't ever use that term it. And whenever you talk about Roe v. Wade, remind people, we're talking about a daughter, not some fictitious, theoretical, philosophical, legal entity, non-gendered it, but a real person. The trial date in Texas is in a footnote of the U.S. Supreme Court's opinion. I gasped the first time I read that. It was exactly 10 months after my birth date. And the U.S. Supreme Court decision was exactly 3.5 years to my birth date. And so I just barely made it. And so did her daughter. This issue would come up quite a bit in law school. As you can imagine, I'd share with classmates in a room of a couple hundred students a little bit of my story, how I was conceived, and explain to them the truth, that whenever you identify yourself as being pro-choice, or when you make that exception for rape, that what that really translates into is you being able to stand before me, look at me in the eyes, and say to me, I think that your mother should have been able to abort you. That's a pretty powerful statement. And I would never say anything like that. I would never say to someone, if I had my way, you'd be dead right now. But that is the reality with which I live. It's like, describe for me how it's not. And I can tell you that it hurts. But I understand that people don't put a face to this issue. For most, it's just a concept, a quick cliche. They sweep under the rug and forget about it. And I do hope that my story and the dozens of other life-affirming stories of others who were conceived in rape and incest, mothers who became pregnant by rape and either regret aborting or raising their child, or are birth mothers from rape, or miscarried their child and are sad about that, which so many people don't understand. They think you should be happy. They say, no, it's the one good thing that came out of the rape, helped me to bring healing, gave me hope to begin caring for myself when I had self-destructive behavior after the rape. I hope that all those stories can serve to put faces, voices, stories to this issue. Well, in response, I'd have people say, I'm not saying that I think that your mother should have aborted you. I'm just saying I think it should have been her choice. Okay, but her choice was to abort me. Oh, you don't really know that. No, I do know that. How can you really know something like that? Because she told me. Well, maybe she might not have, and it's, wait. But she said she would have, and it's like, wait a second, this thing that you say you believe in, why all of a sudden standing there are you so uncomfortable that you have to create this fiction in your mind that maybe she might not have in order to try to absolve yourself of any sense of responsibility? The fact is that I am alive today because of pro-life advocates, leaders, voters, legislators in Michigan who, without even knowing of my exact existence, yet recognized that mine was a life worth saving. And they did so by making sure that abortion was illegal in Michigan, even in cases of rape. 100% pro-life, no exceptions, no compromise. They are my heroes. And I truly owe my life to them. And that is why I, in turn, work to do the same for others. If your mother chose life for you, how nice for you. But mine didn't. She chose abortion. Pro-life advocates chose life for me. And some of us are in need of heroes. We just talked earlier about how being pro-life is so much more than just believing that abortion is immoral. Or just saying you're against abortion. It's believing that a child should be protected, believing that abortion should be criminal, like all other forms of homicide. That's what it really means to be pro-life. college campuses during Q&A, someone will raise their hand and say to me, yeah, I just want to say that I have no problem looking in the eyes and saying to you that I think that your mother should have been able to abort you, and I fully understand that that would mean that you'd be dead right now. Yeah, I just want to say I have no problem doing that. Wow. Okay, well, here you go, everybody. Here's someone who, out of their care for women, that they would say such a thing to a woman like me. Can you feel the love? I'm not feeling it. And that's the thing. They always talk about how much they care about women. And I challenge them. I'm a woman. Now tell me, what good is my right to anything as a woman if I don't have my right to life? And they can never answer that question, because all of the rights are worthless if you don't have your right to life. Well, then I hear people say things like Rachel Maddow would say, don't you think it's a bit extreme to tell a rape victim that she should be forced to carry the rapist's baby? Okay, first of all, I am not the rapist baby. I am my mother's child. I'm a child of God. And what an insult to the majority of rape victim mothers who not only choose life for their child, they actually choose abortion at half the rate of the average unplanned pregnancy. Nationwide, average unplanned pregnancy is over 50%. Rape victims, it's between 15 to 25% abort, 25% choose adoption. When nationwide, only 1% are choosing adoption in unplanned pregnancies. Rape victims, 25%, but the majority of them are choosing to raise her child. And after everything that she's been through, you're actually going to suggest that her child is the rapist baby? What an insult. They don't speak for the majority of rape victim mothers. And I think it's extreme to tell another living human being that they're garbage, that they don't deserve to be living, and that they aren't worthy of protection. They are the ones who are being extreme. And we need to be prepared to point that out. Then they'll try to summarily dismiss my story by saying, oh, well, that's anecdotal. Okay, well, on my website, I have dozens of life-affirming stories of others conceived in rape and incest and mothers from rape, and yeah, that's still anecdotal. Okay, and then I'll start to go through some of the facts with them, and my philosophical abortion essay is ranked #1 if you Google philosophical abortion essay. I mean, I'm well able to go there with the philosophical arguments and legal arguments, but then I watch them as they sit there quite smug, smirking in fact, being well pleased with keeping this discussion in the philosophical realm so that they can play let's make pretend we're not talking about real people. But again, we need to always remind people that we are talking about real people. This is not a mere philosophical exercise. Then they'd say things to me like, oh, well, you were lucky. And I explained this has nothing to do with luck. This has to do with decisions that were made, choices that we all make every day, whether we get involved, how we vote. And don't tell me that our brothers and sisters who are being aborted every day are somehow unlucky. What a cop-out. My birth mother went to 2 back alley abortions. And I was almost aborted. For the first, she said it was a typical back alley conditions that you hear about as to why she should have been able to safely and legally abort me. She said there was blood on the floor and on the tables. She said it was just an OB/GYN's office and she just had to go into the back door. But it was a regular OB/GYN office, but it was filthy. And those conditions and the fact that it was illegal caused her to back out. She was afraid for her own safety. Single mom raising, my brother and sister. And then she got hooked up with a more expensive abortionist, once again through the rape counselor that the police had referred her to. She said there were no pregnancy resource centers back then, but if there had been, she would have gone. And this time, she was to meet someone at night by the Detroit Institute of Arts. Ironically, next to the Thinker statue. Someone would approach her, say her name, blindfold her, put her in the back seat of a car, then take her and abort me, blindfold her down and drop her back off. And again, she was afraid for her safety, but she was prepared to go through with it. My aunt was going to drive her. Oh, and they told her that if she was further along or there were any complications, they would have to keep her overnight. And she called this abortion doctor on the phone, expressed concern for her safety. He called her stupid. She said, okay, you're going to call me names, just forget it. Well, then he went on to swear at her profusely, and she finally just hung up the phone on him. He called her back the next day to try to, once again, talk her into allowing him to take my life for $500. And the same conversation took place. I cannot even tell you what it feels like to know that somebody wanted to take my life so badly that he would even call back the next day. For some people, their near-death experience is waking up out of a coma to find out that they were almost killed in an automobile accident. For me, this is my near-death, life-changing experience. And the fact that I was younger doesn't make it any less real or any less significant. I wasn't lucky. I was protected.
Amen.
Legality matters. And I am so thankful that my life was spared. But I have a lot of well-meaning Christians who would say to me, oh, well, you see, God really meant for you to be here. But I know that God intends for every unborn child to be given that same opportunity. Amen. And it's not like I can stand up here and say, you know, oh, well, at least my life was spared. I deserved it. Look what I've done with my life. And millions of others didn't. I can't do that. And incidentally, I learned only a couple of years ago from my friend, pro-life activist in Michigan, Lynn Mills, that there's actually a film called Back Alley Detroit, which is the most popular film that's used in feminist studies across the country to teach people about what it was like before Roe v. Wade. And so the abortionists who wanted to kill me were probably like featured in that film. Still have not brought myself to watch that yet. But it's so strange to know the time, the place, the circumstances, everything. And then you're just going to act like that wasn't a real experience? That wasn't my life? I've actually had people say to me, well, that wasn't you. Well, who was it then? You know, and here's the thing, is how many of you have ultrasound photos in your baby book? Okay, my kid, we have all their ultrasound photos. Well, not all of them, not our adopted boys, but my daughters, we have the ultrasound photos. And you know, what do your parents say to you? Do they say, I don't really know what that is, you know, it's some kind of clot, a tissue, like, I don't know. You know, what do they say? They say, that was you. And you understand that. And you can ask, you go off to college and you face people with these debates. You ask them if they have their ultrasound photos. Your generation, almost all of them do. When I speak at high school assemblies and colleges, almost all the hands go up. Okay? And the kids finish the sentence, that was you. And they understand the causal connection. And they'll show their children someday and they'll say, that was me. You know, when they have children, they'll say, that was you, and they understand. But somehow, when it comes to this issue of abortion, there's this total intellectual dishonesty. And they'll actually sit there and say, well, I don't know what that is. Or they'll say to me, well, that wasn't you. That wouldn't have been you. Or some people would say, oh, well, if you had been aborted, you wouldn't be here today, and you wouldn't know the difference anyway, so what does it matter? And I explained how that same argument would justify me killing you today because you wouldn't be here tomorrow and you wouldn't know the difference anyway, so what would it matter? And they just stand there with their jaws dropped like, gee, it's amazing what even just a little bit of logic can do when you really think this thing through and what we're really talking about, that there are lives who are not here today because they were aborted. And it's like the old saying, if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one around to hear it, does it make a noise? And if a baby is aborted and no one else is around to know about it, does that matter? The answer is yeah. Their lives matter. My life matters. Your lives matter. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The world is a different place because it was illegal for my birth mother to abort me back then. Your lives are different because she could not legally abort me because you're sitting here listening to me today. But I hope you know that you don't have to have an impact on audiences for your life to matter. And there's something that we're all missing here today because of the generations now. Your generation who has been aborted, and it matters. I'm going to quickly share my Rick Perry story for those of you who haven't heard this. But I'm in the Citizens United film, The Gift of Life with Governor Mike Huckabee. And mine is one of several stories featured in that film. And the premiere was 2.5 years ago in glamorous Des Moines, Iowa. I had backstage passes and 4 presidential candidates were speaking at this premiere. Bachman, Santorum, Perry, and Gingrich. I went backstage, introduced myself to each, handed them my DVDs, Conceived and Raped from Worthless to Priceless, and Accepting Cases of Rape, 12 Stories of Survival. Gave them my business card, Conceived and Raped, Targeted for Abortion, and I told them that I'm in tonight's film. And that I'm the national spokeswoman for Personhood USA. And right away, Bachman and Santorum said, oh, I signed the Personhood Pledge. I said, yes, I know, thank you so much. They had signed it the day it came out, 2 days earlier. It was a no exceptions, no compromise pledge. But Perry and Gingrich had not signed it because they were rape exception candidates. And right away, Governor Perry was stunned. He asked me, this is your story? And I shared with him a little how I was conceived and almost aborted. And he asked me, can I have your autograph? No. And I said, no. He said, no, I mean it. And he ripped off the cell name, handed me a marker and said, here, make it out to my daughter. So I wrote, 100% pro-life, Rebecca Kiessling. And then he asked me some more questions, and I told him how I travel around the country, around the world, speak about 75 times a year, and I now head up an organization of hundreds of others conceived in rape, incest, mothers who became pregnant by rape, and that as an attorney I had litigated numerous high-profile cases defending human life. And he said to me, you know, you're my hero, and I was like, wow. Thank you so much. But it's funny you say that. Because my question for you is, would you be my hero? And I shared with him what I shared with you, that I'm alive today because of the leaders in Michigan who are my heroes. Because I was protected. And so I asked him, would you be my hero too? And he said, yes, I would. But you make that rape exception. And he put his head down. He said, wow, this is so powerful. This is so powerful. And he was thinking about it. I didn't know how much time I'd have, so I told him, I want to get my picture taken with you, but my battery's dead. He said, well, come with me. I'm my own personal photographer. So we went in his green room, and they took tons of pictures with us, which they still have yet to send me. But he kept looking at the camera, saying, I just can't imagine. I just can't imagine. And I looked up at him and I explained that when you make that rape exception, that's like saying to me that I deserved the death penalty for the crimes of my father. The Supreme Court has said that he didn't even deserve the death penalty. There's no death penalty for rapists, that even for child molesters, that it's cruel and unusual punishment. He was nodding his head. And I asked him, but you believe that I, the innocent child, deserved the death penalty? And he said, no, I don't. And I'm like, well. And he stopped me. He said, you know, tonight's event and this film are supposed to be all about changing hearts and minds. And right now, you're changing my heart. And I thought, changing? I had so many friends on Facebook who told me they were praying for me, who kept saying, you're going to have an Esther moment. I just know it. You're going to have an Esther moment for such a time as this. And I was not about to miss it. So I challenged him. No more rape exceptions? And he looked me in the eyes and he promised no more rape exceptions. And I thought, yes! And he said that he had never put a face to the issue before, that he had never considered it from the perspective of someone like me. He's the governor of Texas running for president. You think he's never heard the arguments before? But again, it goes to show what putting faces, voices, stories to this issue can do to pierce the heart in ways in which arguments cannot. The very next day, he signed the personhood pledge, and so did Newt Gingrich. And both came out publicly. Governor Perry did it within a couple weeks. He came out publicly and he said that he could not look me in the eyes and justify the rape exception any longer. That my story had pierced his heart. He didn't get lambasted in the news. So much of the pro-life movement thinks that this issue is indefensible. I saw a New York Times article last week where a leader in the pro-life movement said that rape is a 4-letter word that we just can't even talk about. We need to just talk about late-term abortions. It is not indefensible. Just don't say anything stupid. And what's unfortunate is that for too long, including last summer, when Trent Franks and the Pain Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, when he said, well, you have to understand pregnancy by rape is extremely rare. It's only 1%. And they said, oh no, another egg-in. And then within days, lightning speed, Eric Cantor introduced a rape exception, and nobody flinched in the pro-life movement. Almost nobody flinched. And they immediately endorsed it, and it got pushed through. Lightning speed. He said it on a Wednesday. By Friday, it was national news. By Saturday, there was talk of the exception being introduced. And by Monday, it was introduced. And by Tuesday, it was passed. In lightning speed. Because, of course, as everyone knows, children conceived in rape apparently are incapable of feeling pain like everybody else. Or, oh no, we acknowledge that you feel pain. It's just that you can go ahead and suffer. Really? That's pro-life? But what's unfortunate is that these legislators who have said it's only 1%, all they're doing is taking the lead of the pro-life movement. That has been the majority response in the pro-life movement for the last 40-some years, is to say it's only 1%. Why do you have to diminish? Just defend. Don't diminish, just defend. And lastly, we are not cannon fodder. You do not get to put us out on the front lines and take a giant step back. You do not discriminate. There is no one else who is more marginalized, demonized, stigmatized in today's society as the child conceived in rape. The ones who Jesus would call the least of these.
Yes. Amen. Yes.
And he said that you do not despise the least of these. And he was talking about the little children when he said, when he talked about the 99 and the 1, that you go after and you save the 1. But in the pro-life movement, oh no, it's the 99 for the 1 that needs to end. All right, last thought is on my birthday last year, July 22nd, last Tuesday. My birth mother called me to wish me happy birthday and tell me that my grandma died on my birthday. And we had a beautiful heart-to-heart talk. And then right before we hung up, she stopped me. She said, Rebecca, I just want to say, I'm so glad I had you.
Wow.
44 years later, 44 and a half years after wanting to abort me. And at least she can have that relationship today. All right, when you can say you are pro-life without exception, without compromise, it's like saying, I get it. You matter. Yours was a life worth saving, and I hope you will go forward from here and work to do the same for others without compromise.
Yeah.
Thank you.